Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Barry Kostrinsky. These are artist talks that I host every Tuesday night on Zoom. By the way, past talks can be seen on my YouTube channel, where you can go to my website and find the link for that. Tonight, as usual, we have Maux Kelly modeling for us on 3 different screens. If you want to make Mo larger for when you draw, you can use the 3 buttons in the top right of her screen and sort of pin her screen so it'll be larger. Coming up next week, we have Adrian Jenkins, who will present on Carl Jung, Archetypes, Art Making, and Creative Consciousness. And I want to point out, Adrian's talk was recommended by you, Wendy. Yes, correct? By Wendy. And the following week, we have Mary Zoran presenting. If you want to recommend somebody to present, reach out to me, because I sort of like how the little thread, I know Olga has recommended somebody recently, and it sort of expands the content that we can offer. So, if you like, feel free, reach out to a friend. I'll point out Mo models for free if anybody would like to contribute. You can either reach out to me or to Mo. She's got her email up on one of the screens that you see here. I encourage you to draw. It's part of the exercise of where you try and see if you can do 2 things at once. And what I found is one actually feeds the other. If I draw in a conscious manner, somehow I think we all know when we create, we're a little more in touch. And so the question is, can you then listen? And do you listen a little more deeply? And by doing both, does it sort of activate your mind and sort of, almost like a calisthenic for the brain? And do they feed each other? It may not work. It's sort of, I think most things are an experiment. We know that as artists. And you try something and you see what goes for you. So feel free to draw if you like. Tonight is an open talk. So as usual, I'll look at Michael Krasowitz right away, and I'll look to open up a can of Michael, as I like to say, because Michael always has great things on his mind. And I think that's a big part of these talks, where we share what we're thinking about. And it always sounds one way when it's inside your mind. And once we share, it sort of it takes the public space, even though a small public space, and you get to hear responses, and you get to hear how does it sound sort of outside your ears, so to speak. So anybody is welcome at any time to chime in or to bring up any thought that's on their mind. I'm sure I will, because I tend not to be bashful with that. And a special thank you to Uncle Fred, who's with us. Uncle Fred is Kathy's uncle, and I consider him mine as well. Fred is a music man. He is your guy. He is your go-to for music, and he knows it richly and deeply. And he's reaching outside, coming into the visual arts, because he's somewhat of a self-proclaimed, I don't like the visual arts guy, even though he does like it. I'm wrong. Correct me, Fred.
I will correct you. It does not awake the passion in me that music does. I like it, but music is a whole different area for me. But it's not that I don't like it.
My mistake. And, there it is, pointing it out and saying it and realizing how you have to hone it to get it right. But I do appreciate you coming on, Fred. So nice to see you.
I'm coming for you, not Picasso.
Who's Picasso anyway? That's a whole nother question. Does he still hold the weight and influence? Maybe we'll get back to that. And I will say, what Fred knows about music, you have a skill and an understanding. Those questions apply to the visual arts too. We know that. And in fact, it might be true if you're into biology in a big way and deeply. The general questions often apply to other fields and can be quite enlightening. And I've always found that friends who are not involved in the art world, when they ask questions, they're deep and rich, almost like a kid who doesn't know the field. So he goes into questions and thoughts that we sort of have blinkers on because we think we know what's in our field. Having said that, Michael, how have you been and how was your new year?
Oh, I feel like I'm on the spot. Happy New Year, everybody. It's interesting. I've been trying to catch up on things that I haven't, films and things like that. I haven't had time because I've been busy. So a couple of things I thought I'd share with you guys. Um, about 3 years ago, we started, before COVID, we started a critique group that used to meet near Pratt. It was a live thing, and we would have like 6 presenters, and we did it for about a year, and it was pretty successful. And when COVID came, we kind of put it in the box and forgot about it. But we're starting it up again. And the first, there's a girl named Izzy Nova. She's a young kid that does a lot of social media and promotion, things like that for a lot of artists. And she's starting this thing up again. And the first meeting is going to be January 22nd from 2 to 4 at a place called the Box Factory Gallery, which is in Ridgewick, which is, I guess, on the border of Ridgewood and Bushwick. And the idea is that we're going to have 6 presenters each meeting. So and you could actually physically bring work, share the work, and just share it with the community and get some feedback. So the first meeting is going to be the 22nd. I think I'm going to do a Zoom live feed if anybody can't make it. But if you can join the group. It's the NYCX Philly Group Crit. And the reason it's X Philly is that when we first started it, we had people from Philadelphia and New Jersey driving in to Pratt to come in and do this crit group. And they made their own group, and I went down there a couple of times to Philly, and it's a good group. And it's again, part of this whole idea of artists promoting themselves and getting together and forming a community, which Barry asked me today what to talk about. And I thought we'd talk about, how we can build a community, a visual community. And because I think that my feeling is, and you guys, we can talk about this, is that the old paradigm of the gallery, and somehow that system was going to bring some kind of like international relevance to the work. I think that that's fractionalizing. I think my perception is that things are becoming more regional and more broken up. And these are opportunities for artists to interface with each other and keep that idea of a kind of a greater New York creative group, including musicians, like Fred's saying. I'm really a big believer in like incorporating poetry and music and visual arts together, because then, like, for a musician, it would make more sense. So the visual arts don't make a lot of sense to a musician, perhaps, but if it was more culturally integrated, I think that we could find relevance in each other, and I think once we build the community, then the audience naturally kind of gets drawn towards it. And I think that that's kind of maybe our responsibility in some ways. And I thought, that's what I thought. If we wanted to talk about something, we could talk about that, whether I'm right or, that kind of stuff. But anyway, this is coming.
Yeah, off the cuff is good. Michael, do you think in the past, various artists, musicians, painters, sculptors, poets were more connected than they are today as groups? Because I seem to find today, it seems like everyone's in their separate bubble, and there's not that much dialogue going back and forth when we were all sort of in the creative arts.
Well, this guy that Lauren Monk, he goes by James Com, the James Com report. I mentioned that before. He does this thing on YouTube where he goes around the city on his bicycle, and he has a little video camera, and he knows everybody. He's been doing it for 30 years. He's been to every gallery 3 times. And, I invited him to the Philly, that group crit thing. So he does this interesting thing. He makes these maps. His paintings are maps of like the Lower East Side in the 90s. And he shows where everybody's studio was, where everybody went drinking together, where everybody hung out together. And they went to CBGBs and they listened to music. So they were all kind of interacting with each other because of that kind of idea that there was only one place to go. But nobody had any money. I mean, they were all, from what I understand, people just came there to try to make a community. Now I live in Huntington. I live on Long Island. There's one group artist in Patchogue. There's one artist over here. So we don't, unless somebody makes a phone call, nobody gets together. And that's, that's what I've been doing. That's my mission since that's one of my resolutions this year was to get on the phone and call people and physically get them together, because I feel like that's the only way we can really make something happen.
Michael, I attended Izzy's, crits a couple of times, I think, or more. I mean, do you feel that you were able to make connections to collaborate as a result of that crit group?
Well, I think, like COVID kind of
Yeah,
started, and then, there was a leadership thing where, we were moving from one place to the other. We did move to 12th Street. And before it
right.
collapsed, we
Yeah,
were at,
I remember that. But it was just, it just had people presenting. And then when you left, it was I don't know, it kind of petered out after the meeting. So I was just wondering if anybody got any further with that particular crit.
But the history of it is that previously there was a guy named Christopher Stout.
Oh, yeah?
He was doing this in Bushwick, and it became a real big thing. It was just people presenting for the most part, but it would get a really big crowd, and it was kind of getting known as a thing in the city, as a way to introduce work to an audience. And yeah, I think that's the problem. The art world has always had this issue where people kind of go into their little cliques, and it's not an easy thing, but it's still better than people just being totally isolated. At least they're seeing each other's faces, they're interacting. And what happened was we moved it to, there's a church on 12th Street and 5th Avenue, Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, I went to that.
And that was a totally another level of people bringing their physical work, putting it up on the wall. We had a good 50 to 100 people, I think, the last couple of meetings. And it was starting to really become, like, to me, it's like a destination. If it's not necessarily, no, I don't want to say something, but is it a critique, or is it more an introduction, a way to introduce your art to a particular group and get some feedback? That's an interesting question, Olga, because I think that's something that now that it's restarting, we can have a discussion about what the expectations are of the presenter. Do they really want a critique, or do they just want to, like?
Because I know Izzy organized exhibits, but I don't know how many people from the crit were actually involved in when she was curating whatever.
Well, I talk about that one. There's one guy, Liam. When he first came, he was kind of shy and did a couple of pieces, and he grew over the years. He really developed his work from getting feedback from people, and it really helped him a lot. So, and I know he's going to be around, so I'm sure he's looking forward to it again, because it really fed his creativity. He's into Malkovich, the minimalist.
Melovich?
Melovich, thank you, sorry.
Yeah, suprematist, the Russian suprematist around 1910, 1920. Some very headsy work that you often had to read quite a lot. And once you did, you really respected the work. He started off somewhat figurative, almost like Leger, doing conical forms, a brilliant painter. And he moved towards like a spiritual minimalism, often hanging his work in the top left corner in an exhibit space to mimic where Russian icons would be hung. He was quite brilliant, and maybe not the beginning. There's never any beginning of anything, but certainly a critical point in the history of conceptual art, or at least work with a very strong idea behind it that you almost had to read to open up the work. It read on a very minimal level, but there were symbols that he was engaging that you needed to know about. There was thought that, I remember studied in art history, and it's some of those thoughts, it's almost like quantum physics. Unless your head is right around it and you try and go back to it, you lose it. It's a rich, deep thought. And so probably very good brain exercise. And a figure that will be looked, that history has looked back upon many times, a figure that probably will not be forgotten. Quite a brilliant artist.
And he was doing a lot of interesting things with color, with the relationships of these minimalist fields and the relationship. It's interesting. I mean, I think he really got a lot of interesting feedback, which helped him. So as a critique, I think it worked very well for him. So, but I think it's part of the same idea that that social media functions as. I mean, I've been doing a lot. I'm a real big proponent for getting on TikTok, because I'm really getting a lot of interesting feedback from people, and I feel like little by little I'm there's a potential to build a community there as well, of maybe not necessarily artists, but people, musicians and poets and things like that. There is the potential, let's put it that way. And I think that's where our community is. I mean, I think art functions as a kind of within the community in a certain context. And that's what I was saying at the very beginning, is like, is the gallery space relevant to most people? To a certain group of people it is, but is it really relevant, in a greater context to people and how they disseminate information, or whether it's music or art or poetry? It's got to get to them somehow. There's got to be a way that we can feed our ideas, because right now I really feel like our ideas are so important. Did anybody see the menu?
I did. Anybody else see the menu?
Question for Michael. Do you find that there are artists on TikTok? When you said not necessarily artists, what is the general consensus about artists moving over to TikTok? Because there's so many, obviously, are just stuck on it. Instagram is the place to be. So what are you finding over on TikTok? And I have not gone into that, just because I was always concerned about the Chinese having access to your data situation on TikTok.
TikTok is the village square, as far as I can see. It's the place where everybody gets together, and maybe they're not afraid they don't just stay in their little cliques and they start talking to each other. So you might have somebody stand up on the in the fountain and start reading a poem, or somebody will just stand around at Union Square, the Union Square Park, and hold up a painting. That's the way I feel about it. It's a place where it's like the Wild West. I learned more about what's happening in Iran. I learned more about what's happening in California right now with the floods just by watching TikTok. I don't get that from the news. I get live feeds from people. And Ellen from the Ellen Show, she was on TikTok today with like this, with the flood behind her backyard, showing what it's like with the flood that's happening in her property.
Well, I'm doing that with Twitter. That I'm using Twitter as my source of so much of the news, because it comes out there first. And then you see it in the papers or on the mainstream media news channels. It has been fascinating to watch how Twitter is so ahead of the curve. And I have built a specific group of people that I follow for my news. But that's a different, it's just interesting. I mean, Instagram is basically, you're following all your artist friends. And so for the most part, most people are just putting up their art, what they're doing with their art. And I was just wondering if TikTok had that kind of community.
Well, I think the difference is and again, it's just my Instagram is finished pieces. You know, when you see Instagram, you'll see somebody will post an artwork. I think
I
with
say post what?
they'll post the actual artwork, the finished piece.
Right.
But in TikTok, it's more about the process of development and the conversation about that. And there's a lot of people that turn their painting and show their painting. There is, but I'm more interested in the people that are like, there's one guy that's a portraitist, and he's showing his technique on how he completes a portrait. He just talked about an interesting technique where when he finishes a painting, he'll take like a very transparent green oxide and cover the whole painting with it, and then pull out highlights. And he says that's his technique, and he shows how he does it. And I thought, wow, I'm going to do that with one of my paintings, because I think that's such a great idea. You can kind of control the actual finished piece like that. I never thought of doing that, so I picked up that technique just in a 2-minute TikTok thing. And then I'll write back to him and say, wow, that's really cool. Can I try that? And he'll be like, sure, that's cool. Try it.
Well, there are people doing that on Instagram too, though. I'm seeing all kinds of things. That's why I'm just wondering. It just sounds like there are people that are preferring one social media site over another. I know it's a different. I mean, TikTok is all video. It's just video. Whereas Instagram is a combination, and at this point, everyone's on Reels. Everybody's doing video now on Instagram, and they are showing their process, and they are doing different things. I mean, it's a whole combination. So I just was curious if there was a good building up of an artist community on TikTok.
I don't know, is anybody, I think to me, it's still nascent. It's still the potential of it. And I think that's what attracts me to it. It's a little more raw, and, I've tried to get into Reels, and I just can't seem to find my way there. And I've never been able to get into Twitter. I don't have a reason for it. I think it's just that it's more the process of looking at TikTok. I learned so much in a half hour. Just getting all these different voices, all this different information. I feel like that's the community I want to be part of.
Yeah.
It seems like, you could make an argument for how social media has brought us together. But you could also make the argument, and whether it's Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or the one you were mentioning, Michael.
That TikTok and Facebook.
Right. So the question then becomes, how do you divide your time? And so I've tried to grow my LinkedIn. Even though I have lots of followers, I never posted content. So now, besides Facebook and Instagram, I'm focusing on LinkedIn. And so that's an extra amount of time. And then, of course, I want to look through the feeds. And you're right, different feeds, the feeds are based on how you construct them. But, on Instagram, you're right. It's usually, I can see not only artist work, but when there's a art show in Italy, in Venice, I'd love to be there. But when I'm not there, I can still see it in sort of real time as people post. So there are so many advantages. And also for the political world, when there's a problem in one part of the world the information seems to get out through the various social medias, and it's almost like a weapon for revolution, a weapon in the best way, in that it's presenting news. But as an artist, and you mentioned this, Michael, you get together in groups where you actually see people, you actually bring work. We have a model we can draw now. This is a two-dimensional model. This is on a screen. That's very different than drawing a figure in the round and sort of having to make certain decisions yourself. So I think there's incredible advantages. I've met writers, I've met gallerists, I've met museum people through all the social media, but you could say I never met them. Yesterday, I went ahead and I hung an art show at the Photographica Museum, 22nd Street and Park Avenue. So I got to actually arrange work physically. And I got to meet a couple of the players at the museum, really see them. There's so much more to in the flesh, than there is to these sort of screens where we talk one at a time. Yeah, I was talking with somebody else. When you see somebody, you see more than just the flat image. You really get to know. And Michael, I met you for the first time a couple of months ago when you came up with Lori to see the show. And I feel like I know you, but I feel like I got to know you better from seeing you in person. I just want to point out the dichotomy of, the beauty of social media. It has a lot of depth to it, and it has a lot of shallowness as well. And, think of how we can. What's that?
Not very tactile. Last night, Babs, you were there. Jason, what's his name, artist?
Yeah, I was there. I was the moderator for it. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Seeing people do their thing. This guy, like, okay, these are my influences and this is the stuff I use. And then he, in his words, I'm just gonna let it rip. And the dude for a half an hour, right? Like painted on 2 or 3 different canvases and stuff. Didn't talk while he did it, but that was pretty fascinating. I think that's a pretty rare a thing. And I guess Michael's talking about maybe in a smaller clips, on TikTok, the same sort of thing. But it was wonderful to watch this guy, just fucking do his thing. It was great.
Yeah, well, I'm the one that brought him to that ATOA, and I know him for a long time, and it was interesting how he made a decision to consciously use Instagram in this fashion where once he made that decision that he was going to show you these 30-second clips of him doing something or 15-second clips of him doing something, that he amassed an incredible following. And in fact, he has built up and now has had a couple of galleries reach out to him from his activities on Instagram. And the way that he paints, though, when you really know how everybody does this, it's the same reason that I mentioned de Kooning when we were having the discussion, is you make you make several marks and you go back and you sit. And he does the same thing, but he speeded it all up for essentially kind of like a performance, but it was great. I mean, he, in fact, today posted that painting that he put the black on, the one that he worked on the most in the beginning. He put it up on his feed. And he said, I think this is it. Now, who knows? He may come back and change his mind, but it's that.
You gotta know when to stop.
Yeah, but it was it's an interesting idea, and this idea of finding people that are doing that kind of action and then putting it out there, because obviously when you're working in the studio, you have your own ways of working. How interesting is that? But he'll even put out, as you saw, David, was how he was making his racks. I mean, he did a quick little video of that showing, here's what I do when I store my stuff. I mean, it's like whatever he can think of to put out there, he puts out there.
Yeah, making his space so functional. This is how I made this rack where I keep like 50 fucking canvases in this little corner. Yeah. I mean, and all of this was in one meeting, right? Right. This is the I use, this is what I put it on, and this is watch me do it. And
he now has 45,000 followers on Instagram because he made this conscious effort to, this is what he wanted to do. And he said it took off like wildfire. Just every day, just get all these people start following.
Part of that is once you get on the medium and people see you do it, I could do that. So everybody starts fucking doing it, Anyway,
What's his name again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch his name. What's his name again?
His
listen,
name, Jason Hackenwerth, Hackenwerth.
Okay.
you
I-
could probably watch it on the site where we were last night.
Yeah, it's
It was
on
fun.
it's on
I
ATOA's.
found- Yeah, I mean, I
Site.
found it, it's very difficult to ignore the decorative impulse of a painting. But he, being very open about his influences, and almost every painting you could see the influence, each painter that influenced him in those paintings. I don't know if that's good or bad, but anyway, he's got a good story, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, and it was why I was asking Michael about this. I'm following so many people coming through my feed now on Instagram that are doing that exact performative thing that you're talking about is happening on TikTok. It's not, in my mind, it's not necessarily the social media site, although TikTok and Instagram have some similarities. They're very different than Facebook. Facebook doesn't have this option, but that sort of immediacy and the reels, everything is going to reels now. In fact, I remember I was at some
Sure.
opening, and this was about half a year ago, and they said, "Oh, Babs, reels are where it's at. Got to do the reels. Yeah, put this up. You walk into the studio, set up the camera. Always everybody on you." It's like, oh my God, who the heck wants to do all that shit? I mean, I'm not interested, but he made a concerted decision that this is how he was going to get the work out there. And he found that because it was these quick, little spurts of painting showing him working, he got interest. Now, out of those, I don't know what the percentages is of real art world people following that. Even if it's minute, even if it's 5% or 3% out of 45,000, you're getting something.
So what becomes the end game? You get 45,000 followers. I mean, they're all real people, whether they're art world or not. And you get people looking at your work, and then some museum people or gallerists, and then they're interested in giving you a show. So is that it? Do you fall back on the old paradigm and hope to get a show? Or do you hope to find a collector? Or do you hope to increase your social media on another platform? I sort of liken it to like when they try and bust a drug lord. First, they find an underling, and then they take him in. Instead of putting him in jail, they go ahead and get information from him. And then they bust somebody up the ladder, and then they get information from him and let him go. And they go all the way up the ladder, and at the end, the last guy, he wears a bathrobe, he acts like he's crazy, and somehow he gets away and he never gets caught. And so are we chasing our own tail? Or
No, the end game, I don't know what it is, but it's the journey. I mean, that old thing, you know what I mean? We'll find out what the end game is. But right now, with all the technology and everything, I don't think we know how it's going to sift out. So we just keep doing what we have to do.
And I think, like Bob said, this artist found that format. I will say, I learned a lot about working on a wheel in ceramics by not working on a wheel. I watched videos from all over the world. I saw different approaches in India and Korea and Japan and the United States, all over. And, at one point when I worked on the wheel, I was like, are my hands right? And I realized everybody uses their hands however they work, however it works for them. And I got a great education. Now, of course, I had to go on the wheel. You've got to get the feel. But I really did get informed. They say you can learn to fly an airplane through a flight simulator. There are very few things that really translate. But I think, like you're saying, I picked up a tip. You said that, Michael, on how to do this with color. And I think we do learn. So to your point, David, it is that journey where we're sharing. We're really sharing. You're watching how the guy stores things in a corner. And like any talk, if you could take away 3 things or 1 thing, that's something you take away and learn. And it's also, the sharing, maybe that connecting and communicating is
the sharing, the passing on, I think is so important. And I don't know, for some reason, I thought like that was kind of, until now, people kept their technique, their fucking shit secret. You know what I mean? And
definitely
to share, like, look at this cool thing I did, how quick I did it. That's awesome that people, the share, the giving, you're going to get back. The giving is in the getting. You have to share. It's selfish not to share what you know. And internet is such, wow, there's a lot of sharing possibilities. I think as we get older, I think it's selfish for us not to share. And it's easier on the internet than, I'm going to be at this gallery, doing a show this afternoon to show what I do. So it's awesome, like Mike was saying. You learn so much without having to travel.
I think it's more than that, and that's why I mentioned the movie, The Menu, because I saw this week. I saw The Menu. I saw I tried to watch Babylon, and I watched this other film, White Noise. And in all 3 films, I was very aware of the camera. Before, and with film, I guess maybe when you go to a movie and you're in the space and you're watching the film, you get caught in the magic of it and you forget the camera's there. But I watch on TV, I'm very aware that it's a film, and it's like kind of a postmodern aesthetic, right? We're now aware that we are the audience watching a film being constructed, and these are people acting. And I know, David, you're an actor, and when you go to the theater, they're actors. They're on a stage, they're telling a story, and you appreciate the technique of them acting.
Yeah.
As much as the story itself.
Standing around watching, in headphones and shit. Yeah.
Right. It's a different paradigm.
Yeah.
I think that what social media does, there were so many points I would that you made me think about, was that we're aware of the camera now, and that changes how we perceive the finished product.
Yep.
So the reels and the TikTok and all the other things have created this different sense of community. So as you're creating, and like I'll show the process, by the way, this person that got all the views, I've tried that. I tried all that technique, and none of that stuff worked for me. I'm very happy it worked for him, but I never got it to do the gel and do anything. My wife, she was just here. She has over 100,000 followers on Instagram, and it's great, but that it kind of capped out, and nothing really came of it. And she's internationally known as a dancer, but nobody's come and said, we want to give you a tour and send you to Europe and dance in Europe, but which was the hope, But anyway, aside from that, I think that it's about the conversation, with what does the artwork, the final artwork, do? Is it the artwork itself that we're interacting with, that, the people going into that gallery and they're having that experience? Is that how people are disseminating information now? Or is it it's the arc? The finished product becomes part of the arc of the creative process. And that whole thing becomes the finished product.
Well, I want to just go back for 1 second. I think for Jason Hackenwerth's endgame was really about changing how he was living his life. And I knew him when he was traveling all over the damn world doing these giant sculptures made out of these latex balloons.
That's right.
And he didn't even tell the story of like how he ended up getting the one in the Guggenheim and how he put it all up in 2 days in that center space.
And it's massive.
It's massive, and they didn't think he could do it. But And he's done it he was doing it in London, he did it in Dubai. I mean, he was all over the place. And now he's a bit older. He's just in his early 50s, but his wife was younger. Now he's got these 2 young kids, and he needs to figure out how he can generate some kind of income and not have to be traveling all over the world. And he missed painting. I mean, he said that last night. So he started painting again. And in the beginning, he had this group of followers, but he had a conversation with a person who helped him to understand what Instagram could do for him, essentially. And Michael, I hear you. Who the heck knows what it's going to do or where it's going to lead? But obviously, he hit on a formula that worked so that he did things where he would offer. How this began too is he would offer a painting, a small painting. He started this. I remember when he first started it, and he would go to the highest bidder, and he would start at a $50 bid. I mean, and he'd sell, some tiny painting for $250, and then he'd do it again, and then he'd do it again. And in the beginning, he was donating the profits to a food bank. And this all began right in around the COVID thing too. So he had this, so he started building up this group of people, but for him, the end game was how he could continue to do the thing he loved the best, was to stay in his studio and paint. Whatever that means to anybody, right? It's like we all want to be able to do that. And if you can generate some income from it, great. If you can't, so be it. I mean, I chose all other kinds of ways to generate income because I could be doing these paintings to generate income, which my gallery will sell. But then I decide, oh no, I want to do these installations that I can't sell to anybody. I mean, but it's what I want to do. So how, the social media whole thing, it's its own thing. I mean, look, it's allowing us to sit here in terms of, just because of Zoom, virtual allows us to sit here and have this conversation to discuss whatever topic, obviously. So it's just fascinating to.
But Babs, if I understand you correctly, it seems that you were saying that Jason, with his travels around the world, established contacts, correct? And those contacts followed him on Instagram? And
Yes.
he had a following before he even became even bigger.
But right. Yeah, but he said to me, he goes, Babs, he goes, he had about 5,000 followers. That's a pretty good following. And he said, but once I started doing these things, I turned that 5,000 into 45,000. And now he's got 2 galleries that are seriously interested in his work to show his work and sell his work. That was his goal. He accomplished his goal. Everybody.
Well, maybe the real grain of sand in there is, if I asked everybody here, what is your goal? I don't know if all of us could define that. And so really having an idea of where you want to go, having a sort of intention, and that could generate the action around it. And that's what he did in a way.
Exactly.
I've always had this nefarious goal to be an artist. Well, that's nice. And I feel like I've become an artist. But if I honed it a little more, it would give me direction and steps to do that I would naturally want to do that would get me exhibition shows, gallery shows, and then maybe museum shows. In the Gurdjieff work, they point out having an intention is very important. On the other hand, when I draw, I put a mark down and I follow the path. So I do both. I both, and I think that's the nature of knowledge. Whenever you try and say this is the way, the opposite way works as well. So whether you decide that you hone a path or that you follow a free flow, I think they both can work. But certainly the real and successful, I'd have to define, but the artist you were speaking about, Babs, he achieved, he grew his audience, and he got what he wanted. And, there's a thought that we all really get what we want, just so we don't know what we want, and we don't put out what we think we want, and we put out a bunch of other stuff, and that's sort of what happens to us. So it is complicated. It's not straightforward.
The art, I guess the goal, you know, the only goal I've ever had, which is of course to do a show, is, you know, when I'm painting, is for there to be some semblance of intention for each work, you know. And that's really the only goal. But for each individual painting, you do, I think, start on a path, and then I wander off the path. I lose control of what's going on the canvas. And then later, you know, you find your way back. You gain some sort of control of where you're going and get back on the path, and then know when to fucking stop. That's kind of what I do. So I guess the goal, you know, the goal is the only goal I've really ever had was to put a body of work together, you know, for a show. Like there's some semblance of intention between each one. Anyway.
But the
Let me
goal is
open it up.
also still.
Let me
So
open it up to
meaning-
other people. Do other people here have a specific goal that if you're in an elevator speech, could you say what the goal is of your art?
What do you, let me back up that question a bit and define what you mean by goal. Because the question is, what is it that you want to do? It's different than a goal versus what is it that you want to do? Or is goal what you want to do?
So when I ran a metalworking factory, the goal was to make the product so we could then sell it. Just about an electrician, his goal is to come to your house, fix your electrical problem, do some wiring. The whole world is really goal-based. People in finance find that extra point or two in a stock or make a good long-term investment. They can really define their goals. And I'm not saying it's necessary, but I do know artists don't have a defined idea of their goals, that what they are, just by you even asking. You know, I once saw a collector speak. I didn't think much of the woman based on the outside, but what came out of her mouth was brilliant. And she asked the group of artists, what do you want the observer to get out of your art? And oh my God, how many of us don't address that? We'll address our experience. We want to be creative. We'll address a whole bunch of things. And yes, maybe it all comes from that, but we should have a sense, what do we want the viewer to get? What is the takeaway? Even if it is just their interpretation, you know, it's one thing to know what you get out of it, but I think it's important. Jeff Koons knows what he wants to get, and he gets it. Damien Hirst knows what he wants to get. I'm not putting them on a pedestal, but in terms of showing at the right galleries and getting museum exhibits, they do belong on that pedestal, even though
I know what I want.
okay.
I know what I want. And I go after it. And I make a decision on what a particular installation is supposed to do for the viewer, how I want to have them react emotionally. And I made a decision. I wanted to do installations, and I love the idea that you come in and I can affect the whole space and transform the space, and and affect people emotionally. And I will tell you, the reactions I got to this last installation pretty much was right on target what I expected. They just came in and just said, wow, it's a complete about change from your previous installations, which were much more dark. I wanted this idea of beauty, the beauty of the tree. What is your reaction when you think about trees? What is your reaction when you think about trees in relationship to yourself, to the environment, to this whole set of factors? I've had these goals and I make a decision and then I go for it. So,
What you said, the asking, what do you want the viewers to get out of it? I don't, to have any sort of goal like that, for me, sullies the whole process. You know what I mean? That is not even in my picture. What I
It's in
want
my picture, the way I make work. I definitely want the viewer to be provoked or prompt.
Yeah.
Think,
Well,
at least think, but also act.
No matter
well, I
what
think
the,
you're the viewer, David. You're missing the point. If I
Yeah.
have the reaction to myself, if I'm satisfied with it, I feel these things. I feel the viewer will feel these things. I mean,
Right.
the viewer is another human being. The viewer is somebody else coming in and looking at it.
Right.
You're the one making it. You have a vision. It's
I don't
sort of
really
the
have
same
anything to
thing.
do with what they think.
What?
I don't really have anything to do with what they think. I made a picture.
This is an interesting conversation. I think this is really what you guys are discussing is really the core of where we are culturally in terms of how bifurcated the art world and culture is in a way. Because I think that these are the two paths towards enlightenment, which I think one has a very clear ego consciousness intention, and the other one basically states that the intention is transcendental, and the intention is inherent within the process of creating. And I think that this is a very deep conversation, and both have validity. And I think both of them, in a way, have a certain amount of deception built into them. Because the person that has the intent knows that there's a certain amount of risk and chance that happens inherent in the process. The person that has no intention knows that for a certain extent, there's a certain amount of intention built into it. You know, I was just thinking that I was just looking for the quote. When Buddha said, I don't know if it was Buddha, I'm going to probably get this wrong. When he would go on a journey, if he knew where he was going, then it wasn't a journey.
Right.
Because the journey would take him to where he was meant to go.
Right.
And I think that this is kind of the yin and yang thing. And I think that if we I'm trying to understand the idea of the balance between the two. Conscious intention has a subconscious element. Purely subconscious things can't exist because that's pure chaos. You need the physical reality to kind of ground the intention of the person who's allowing the intent to just not just so you might have certain parameters to no intention. I was just reading something about what's his name? I can't remember. Frank Zappa. So when Frank Zappa would do a solo, it was a great quote, a great interview. He said, well, I don't know what I'm gonna. There's a lot of people that they know the solo, they polished it, they play the solo, and it's perfect. But when I go in, I know I've got this much time. I know I've got this beat coming into it, and what he said I do is I color in that time. I thought that was such a beautiful kind of way of thinking about it. He's using his music to color that time that he was given.
Sure.
In those parameters, you know.
Size of the canvas. Yeah.
Yeah, those are very important comments you made, Michael. But I also want to address for a second, David. No one can control the viewers. We all know that. But you have to have, in my mind, I have to have an intent for myself as a viewer. I'm the viewer of my work. I want to be happy in the end with my work. So I'm feeling if I can get that point across to myself, if that makes any sense,
Yeah.
then somehow that will get conveyed to whoever comes in. Now, everybody has a different reaction. That's obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
they bring their own history. They bring their own consciousness, their own unconsciousness.
Yeah, and you see, it's not knowing, like really naively going into something like an installation and never had done one before, and a pretty big one, and not knowing, you know, what people's reaction would be. No fucking idea. And it was like a interactive thing where it was in a church where I brought sod in and put grass over the whole floor and made this walking meditation path through the church.
Yeah.
And there was there were no pews. It was just a big open space, but there was the balcony. And I went up there to look, and it was, I didn't know what to think, and that they let me do this. I didn't know what. And it was a completely beautiful thing. And I don't know what inspired me to do the way I did it or anything, but I had no expectations. It was a walking meditation, so you can't have. You know,
But this all came out of the question by Barry about goals and intention.
Right.
And you're now talking about the whole goal was to have no intention. Literally, that's what you're saying. So you literally have a goal, is what I'm saying. You had an intention by having no intention.
Well, like Michael was saying about the journey, the Buddhist, it's
right.
You know, you can't focus on where you're going, or you don't enjoy the journey. You know, so I'm not focused on what people think of. Yeah.
Well,
I have done site-specific things, like we want a painting this size in this space. And I have done site-specific things like that. So yeah, the goal is totally fucking within that, you know, time, space, totally goal, you know, oriented to, and then there's that, you know, thing, that decorative impulse you can't ignore. Anyway, but yeah, that thing was a total, you know, goal, a client, boom, this giving them what they want, rather than sometimes I think it's a bit selfish. Me, when I'm working, I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. And
well, that's a whole different conversation. In my mind.
to not have any intention, no expectation of anybody liking it. See, sometimes I feel selfish. I'm just doing it for me. You
But
know?
liking, but you're back to saying somebody liking it, that's not the intention of necessarily of something. The intention is to have an effect or have an emotional response.
Our fellow Jason we're talking about, I think a big part of his intention is people to like it. I mean, that's right. I mean, his work has a serious decorative impulse. And
Yeah.
And so I don't know, that's his goal.
Yeah, but the one of the other things that goes on when you're making and I'll just give my own example here. My first installation was back in 2003. I'm now doing this 20 years. And the differences and what I've learned, and also part of it is I give myself these incredible goals, and can I accomplish them and can I achieve them is part of the goal that I set for myself. It's almost like overcoming your fears in a way, and to approach things in a fearless manner is interesting to me, because we all have our fears, and whether we can pull something off. I mean, all my installations are in my head. I'm doing, you know, then I'm making all these pieces and parts, and until it's all put together, and that's like there's an excitement and a rush to that. When you get to the site and now you got, you know, 3 days or 4 days or whatever it is, and you got to put it all together, and does it work? It's not like sitting there and working on a painting and you're solving it and you're solving and you're solving it. You're under this pressure. Well, this idea that's been in my head now for a year really work. And that's part of the excitement. That's also part of the goal, is a challenge. Always challenging yourself, keeping yourself curious, keeping yourself interested. It's a whole other factor that is in the work.
Yeah.
I know I'm off subject a little, but
No, it has nothing to do with the actual work. That's the thing too. Like you know, you're under time constraints with the gallery and stuff. And that has nothing to do with your actual work, except it's site specific, I guess. You know what I mean? Everything that led up to that. It's like acting. It's like all the fucking work you don't see. The
Yeah.
most important shit is off camera.
Yeah,
You know, the work the actor did off stage. That's all that shit that he brings on. That's where all the shit is. Then you look at the picture. And so, I don't know, selfishly, I'm into all the shit that goes on behind and let people do what they want.
You know, there are a lot of great thoughts brought up, and I think that's part of what we do here. I'll try and tie it together with a story about Gödel, a great mathematician who went back and forth on some ideas and almost went crazy trying to prove a theorem and then proving the opposite of the theorem. And eventually, Gödel came up with the incompleteness theorem, which basically says there are things you can't know. You know, that's sort of the summary. That probably has more philosophical impact for everything in the world, and nobody knows this mathematician or the thought. And I think what we've hit tonight is we've come at things from two sides. Both are viable, and we have this yearning to know, but which is the path, which is the right way? And the answer is there is no right way. And, you know, yes, it's up to you to choose your way and what you do and what works from you. And I think as artists, we try and get at the unknowable. You know, beauty, nobody here could define that. Love, you couldn't define that. Pain, you could give little examples. In a painting, in a very flat, very still object, you try and touch the soul in a very deep way, in an undescribable way. So Malevich, for all the writing behind his abstract work, the idea is that image is going to carry import that's greater than anything. And I feel every material and medium should have a scope. Take music. Music hits you in your soul. Your body vibrates off of the vibrations. You could write about it. You could say, I like that. It made me feel this. But it's more than a feeling. Those are just labels. And, you know, the old aestheticians on art always place music at the top because of that sort of how it sort of pounds at you in a very deep way. And when I first read that, I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a painter. That's the sort of top order. But the point is, every material brings its sort of uniqueness. And as artists, we sort of try and delve into the dark a little bit and come out with a little light, or delve into the bright light and pull a little darkness out. And I think you'll find with everything you're dogmatic about, the opposite you could be dogmatic about. And so to bring it back to Buddhism and Taoism, maybe it's a letting go of this dualism and this idea of, you know, do I just work subconsciously and try and let it out? Do I work like Angers and have a, you know, John Dominique Angers have a direct vision and, you know, do this incredible hyperrealist work that is more than real? Or do I vacillate between? I think we're always vacillating, because even with Ang, there was an idea that came before the work. And if you want to try and go into your subconscious, you can't go in there unconsciously. You know that. That's so there is this sort of play of both together, and maybe the words become the limit. And as artists, we want to go behind the words. Poetry is not made up of words or ideas. There's a synthesis that's sort of greater. And I think that's our goal. And when we meet here and we exchange, and you're right, Babs mentioned it, there are a lot of ideas, and Michael did. And I think that's part of it. We like to bombard ideas. One idea naturally spars another one. And we see how that sort of opens our mind. And in a sense, Bab, it opens our mind so that it's beyond what we thought where we'd be. And I think it was Michael used the word enlightenment. And at one point, I described art's goal again, very limited, but its goal is enlightenment, meaning it should open horizons. Again, anything I say dogmatically, you could argue against very easily. I want to thank you all for coming. This was a great, non-formatted, unconscious, conscious effort to sort of flesh out ideas, to share ideas with friends, to draw at the same time if possible. We have 2 great talks coming up in the next 2 weeks. We are going to be delving into Carl Jung a little bit with someone who's doing some very interesting work. And again, if anybody has a presenter that they'd like to recommend, or if they would like to present, reach out to me. I'm starting to book up dates. And, you know, my goal is always to bring exciting conversation, to bring people together. I've referred to us as a hive. I think we're a lot more connected than we realize. We feed each other in a lot of good ways. I like to think this is the opposite of politics. This is a win-win game in the arts. Yes, it's so hard to make a living off your art, but we make a different kind of living. A living that maybe it doesn't feed our pocketbook, but it sort of feeds a richness in our soul, in our brain, in our heart, or in something we can't describe. And I think we all know this is our path without being able to explain who has paths, what a path, who gave it to us. I think we all know this is our place. And so thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mo. If anyone would like to contribute to Mo, special thank you to Fred, Uncle Fred in the house. Let's hear for Uncle Fred. There he is. Uncle Fred.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Mom.
Great conversation tonight. Michael, some really insightful, good thoughts.
Thank you.
Very, very fascinating things to think about. And I had a good friend who was an artist, a designer, but he said that music was the ultimate because it was just this raw touching. There's no need for explanation. It's just felt. And he was always envious of people being able to create music and how you could touch people with that. And that's an interesting thing to think about too, when you're making what you make.
Universal language, they say, music.
Yeah, they do. And they say it for a reason because it truly is. It's amazing. Anyway, thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Babs, David. Great conversation, everybody. I'm going
Thanks.
to end the recording if I can find.
Thank you,
Okay,
Barry.
Good to see you, David.
bye.